Welcome to another episode of the Craft Podcast. Today, we are joined by Tony Wan, who is the head of customer experience for TruPlay Games. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks for having me, John. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while since we last met in person, but I've been following your career, and I think you have a very unique craft. Do you want to talk more about that?
Sure. Yeah. It's been certainly hasn't been a straight path. Started if we talk about I was in the nonprofit world for a long time, and then moved from doing nonprofit and government work over to the private sector. Started in gaming quite a while ago, but on the production side of things. So really working with engineers, artists, business folk, and just launching a game, putting it out there. And did that for a number of years before I really got into let's say more of the customer experience and the customer service side of things. In one of the startups that I did, where I was pretty much given like all of the player facing stuff, and really kind of fell in love with the ideas there, and wanted to see if those sort of crazy ideas that I had and executed at the startup would scale with much larger games and companies. And so, later on went over to Riot, and then most recently, Epic Games was there for the past 3 years.
Awesome. So, I think customer service for a lot of people, myself included, has been an afterthought. And I feel like when something goes right, we take it for granted. When something goes wrong, like we get super angry. It just seems like a super tough role. Can you talk about how that is accentuated, or it's just the same in gaming versus non-gaming?
Yeah, I think for sure in gaming it is a little bit accentuated, right? It kind of depending on how long a company's been around and or how many hits they currently have, live. But usually it's an afterthought because a lot of people, the way they start getting game studios is you get the bare essentials, right? You have your dev team, you have your artists, you have your designers, and then you just kind of go for it, and you're hoping to land, something with an audience. And only after things get successful, and you're like, oh man, like what do we do now? There's all these tickets all of a sudden. There's all these people, writing in, and so it definitely gets, accented, I would say, in the game space. And a lot of companies find themselves in a very difficult situation depending on the size of their hit, and really scrambling sometimes for years afterwards, trying to pay back, let's say, the tax on not being prepared. But then you have that kind of financial question in the beginning too, of like how much should you invest? And I think a lot of game companies don't think about would be a wise, I would say, bare investment, to make sure that you have sort of the correct systems in place before things really pick up.
So do you think there were any, let's say, inflection points in gaming player support / customer service? And did it emerge at any particular companies? I'll give you some examples. Just top of mind for me, I've played all sorts of games, but good CS player support, I always think of companies like Blizzard, Riot, Epic. Basically, that's it in my mind, top of mind. Like, what do you think, since you know more about the industry?
Yeah, I think you start out with Blizzard is certainly what I would call out as kind of one of the OGs of looking at really investing in their customer service teams. They hired started up a bunch of in-house call centers. They had from testimony of friends who were there when the CS orgs got spin up, they always talked about like kind of this rabid, almost like religious commitment to like making sure that they were taking care of their players, right? And I think that a lot of what kind of Blizzard built around taking care of their players ended up reverberating throughout the industry, and a lot of them becoming, in some cases, not even backed by data per se, but just there's this almost kind of like religious like feeling like, oh, you have to do X, you have to do Y, and you could see the legacy of those ideas in companies that explicitly make a part of their mission, in some shape or form, a really strong commitment to being player focused, right? So, Riot has it within their manifesto. It's kind of been consistently there, and you get a lot of really sort of passionate conversations internally about how much should be reinvested. What are we doing to focus on the player? And you see just, yeah, you definitely see those things kind of pick up through the rest of the industry. And so you see a lot of people learning from each other. A lot of the teams, let's say, from these places, throw Supercell in there later on as well, um, really do have a tightly knit community. I think especially, being partly out when I was out in Europe, there's a big community, just organic community that was built out there of player support folks who would meet together in conferences, kind of industry only, closed door, to share a lot of best practices, ideas, what worked, what didn't work so well, and trying to even kind of share that learning with startups or smaller studios that are in the ecosystem, and really trying to help each other out. So there's a very healthy community of sharing. A lot of us, I think, we've seen each other at different companies, and we know each other. And so, a lot of these ideas kind of get shared around, and you definitely do see a lot of those ideas. Although I would say there's still, because of the way the teams spin up, there's still quite a large gap between kind of the number of people who've kind of been through the ringer and been at a number of these companies, and then kind of I would say, the next generation of folks who are coming up, and having to, some of them trying to relearn all of the stuff that some of us have battle scars, to help them out. A lot of them are trying to reinvent the wheel, and so you see a number of us trying to provide more broader resources and documentation, just to help other people out, so that they don't have to, go through all of the pain and rediscover things that have already been tried.
So you mentioned Supercell, and I would say I'm a casual mobile game player, but for some reason, maybe because I am casual, I've never even attempted or thought of submitting like a ticket for a mobile game. Whereas for PC games or desktop games, I find it to be like easier. It's like a natural tendency for me, at least, to go to like maybe like a forum.
Yeah.
Can you describe like the differences between maybe like PC games, or could be live service games versus mobile games?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you've seen in the industry, and it's continuing to happen today. There's, I would say, in some cases, there's been a gradual change for some of the more traditional studios that, it's like AAA. It's like the old Hollywood type business model. You're gonna get dump 60 million dev for like 6 to 8 years, right? And you're hoping for huge ROI. Like, studios that still produce games like that kind of have, that traditional type of customer interaction where you've got forums. They have kind of their set systems and cadence and different channels, very mature channels of communicating with players, and all of those things are set up. And it's, let's say, there tend to be more technical challenges on launch, maybe with all of the different hardware configurations. And so, you're going to have those different types of issues where they're going to reach out. But in general, they tend to have some of the older considerations around that. A lot of them might still have very significant in-house teams. Some of them are transitioning out, especially since COVID hit. They're like, I had friends call me up from EA. They're like, hey, like we've got to, in order to kind of spread risk for these kinds of events, we now have to kind of plan for the future to have more of our support teams outsourced rather than all in-house, because they were really, really hit super hard, by the pandemic. And so you saw a lot of the kind of traditional AAA players at least move some of their workforce to outsourcing, for example. And you just see like kind of a lot of different tendencies where, if you have hardware concerns, if you're Sony, or if you're Microsoft, Xbox team, Nintendo, they tend to do things like have phone support or voice, which a lot of the kind of mobile folks or live service games won't have, just due to the sheer volume of contacts that they get. Right. I mean, you have, let's say, a much smaller player base that's just stuck on a console or going to have hardware problems, who really need to talk about that stuff, versus anyone who could just ping you because they want free stuff. Give me more free premium currency or whatever it is that you're struggling with for your live service games. So live service games tend to have a lot more volume just due to the nature of being, free to play, right? Like, one of the things a lot of people aren't ready for is just sort of the ridiculous um, daily intake that you can get from having a free to play title that's extremely popular. There were some cases where, my days over at Epic, I would share with other friends what our, daily volume spikes could be on new season launch, and they're like, "What the hell? We don't get that in a year, right?" Like, it can get pretty gnarly. And so, one of the challenges when you were supporting is mobile titles, free to play titles, live service games, is really dealing with the challenges of scale, especially if you have a hit on your hands. It can get very, very kind of big and difficult to manage very quickly if you're not ready for it.
Okay, so this is kind of tactical, but I think we may have talked about this in the past, which is, what's like the evolution of the importance of forums to games and to CS? And what do you think? How are things transitioning with software like Discourse, which I'm not even sure what to call it. I think there's like a proper name that you told me last time, where it's more like a self-service. They get to answer questions before they like it triggers a ticket or anything.
Right, right.
So yeah, so please talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, forums. There's always this big debate. It really depends on the community, right? Like, I think forums can still be a valid way for people to help each other. Um, in some cases, it just depends, I think, really on the players. If they want to keep something alive, they're going to do it, right? And that doesn't always work out. Like, there's not always a very strong community that's empowered by the development teams to be able to kind of run like a forum that's like very well moderated and taken care of, because a lot of these forums just get out of hand, and a lot of companies just shut them down just because it's like, this thing is crazy, there's way too many people in here, we don't have enough resources to like monitor this thing, it's getting toxic. There's a lot of different reasons to kind of shut these things down. And so, people are looking for help, and then you have trolls on there, and you have all this other, kind of, let's say, challenging behaviors to manage and to moderate. And so a lot of people really are opting for self-service route, or to go to channels like Discord you mentioned, but other channels as well, to get better self-service, right? And a lot of companies, what they're looking to do in these channels to kind of help deal with the volume is, a lot of them will deploy certain kinds of different chatbots to help with kind of very basic transactional type questions, or if you don't know where to go to do something for yourself, they'll use those. But I think a lot of the chatbots actually, I think, kind of suck, right? Like a lot of them aren't very smart, and so like they're not really gonna do a lot for you. I remember just kind of being a consumer of these things, a lot of people would try to sell me on a chatbot. They're like, hey, it deflects, 80% of, and I'm like, yeah, you piss people off. Like you're just making them angry, right? But then they count as a success. And even when I went to, let's say, some very broad customer service kind of executive conferences, I remember in one of them there was a lady who was talking about this, and I was just very curious. I was like, okay, that sounds really great, but like, do you ever talk to your customers about how satisfied they are with this automated experience? And things got quiet really quick, and I didn't want to seem like a big jerk, so I just kind of stopped there. But it was very like obvious to me that a lot of people don't vet the true satisfaction or like the customer experience with these kinds of tools. And so I think the best route has always been like a page from Amazon's book. I would say, for example, would be just don't have problems at all, right? Like I think a lot of the best products and services out there, if you really respect your customers, like they just don't have problems, right? That you need to go stop whatever it is that you really want to do and like go talk to somebody. Because I always tell my customer service agents this, like, as lovely as you are, people don't actually want to talk to you, right? Like they'd rather not. And so if they're contacting you, there's definitely some problems there, but you can, through better self-service, and there's a lot of different technologies that play into this, but essentially find really smart ways of surfacing the best information and the best kind of self-service workflows to help people find the answer that they need or solve their own problem in a very short amount of time. And I think those are the much better solutions, just because it's easier for customers versus interacting with a very clunky chatbot that can't understand, when they're really upset, what's going on, and then they have to get transferred to a real person anyway, and then it just sucks, right? Because you just made it harder for them.
Okay, I've got 4 follow-up questions. I'll do one at a time. So actually, I meant Discourse, which they just
Okay.
raised their Series A, because I forgot about them, but they're like a 7-year-old company that just raised their
Yeah.
Series A. What is that called? It is something like self-service workflow. I don't think that's the right terminology.
Uh-huh.
Do you know what it's technically called?
The
So
RPAs or.
so in the sense of, I remember how like Discourse, there is a
Mhm.
forum component, but in addition to the forum part, there are just kind of like top questions that somehow the admin can moderate or float up to like subjects and topics. And
Mhm.
it's almost like a self-service, um, not like a
Like a
workflow, but
like a Stack Overflow, right? Like that
yes,
one, the
yes.
Stack.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
what's the Stack Overflow called? Like that type of product.
Yeah. So, it's an online forum. It's peer-to-peer, right? And so, typically we'll just describe it as like a peer-to-peer support, right? And if you look at a lot, like Stack Overflow is, one of the kind of greatest examples that we look at, where it's people helping other people. Replicated it across a number of orgs. Had something like that at for the Riot team in Europe, and then something similar for Unreal Engine, right, where kind of the engine users are helping each other out on kind of very common usability issues. And so peer-to-peer support. What was the question about peer-to-peer support? Is there like just what about it, or?
Um. Well, what about it? Like, is that being used in the game industry? I don't really see it. I helped implement Discourse for New World, but
Mhm.
I didn't see that many other companies get into it. Actually, if anything, sorry, I have to bring this up. I remember maybe something I chatted with you. Was it Epic Games? I think Epic Games shut down their forums. Someone shut down their forums around the same
Yes, we
time
did.
I spoke with you. Yeah. So can you
Yep.
talk? So can you talk about why did that end? You kind of mentioned it, alluded to it earlier about the support, but also
Mhm.
what did you replace it with?
Yeah. So I mean, The thing about the forums weren't at Epic weren't owned by support. It was owned by community, and community didn't have the bandwidth at the time to really support those, and was getting, a lot of traffic, not enough people to go through everything. And they, before right before I got there, they had sort of tried to redirect all of the players to like, hey, can you just go to player support and like file a ticket instead, because this is getting like super unruly, right? And so you ran into the problem of just not having enough people and not having the appropriate like structural setup, right? Because if you have, let's say if you do like use the discourse product, right, where you can organize the conversations very easily, and you can almost like gamify the participation of people on the platform, or if you use something very similar like a sprinkler form, etc. These all have tools in which you're helping to create almost a social game out of peer-to-peer support, right, where people are getting recognized, getting badges, getting all that kind of stuff. And some game companies do that. You'll see, I think EA, if I remember correctly, has some of this for some of their titles. And so you can use that together with your community team to like build a community around of, players supporting other players, which is really healthy. Riot has something called, and I'm not sure if it's still in operation, it's called the Wrenchman program. And these people are, directly supplied with, let's say, just information, news to help, manage their different communities. It's done in a variety of different languages. I think one of the strongest ones is the German community for League of Legends. And so this kind of work is being done in pockets. I would say it's not a widespread phenomenon yet, although I would say that there is a lot of potential for it. It's just a lot of people don't really. It's hard for, I think, internal teams to make the business case to purchase these. A lot of these are pretty expensive. The softwares that support them can be costly, and they kind of have challenges around just making the case for that. And usually, you tend to have challenges to ownership, whether that be the community team, right? Who owns these channels? Do we want player support like talking so openly across these like public forums? Are they trained on what to say? And you get PR gets mixed into there. So there are some of those concerns as well. And yeah, basically the reason a lot of those kind of things get shut down, in an Epic's case, it was certainly just not having enough people at the time. A really small community team, and they were just super slammed, and we couldn't hire fast enough. And it was just like, well, let's just shut this down for now. And that's all. It's kind of just like this reflex action. And like once in a while, some of the community team is like, hey, we need to start up forums again, etc. But I still don't think it's happened yet.
No, I actually kind of respect that because sometimes companies, and I think Epic is interesting because they are, obviously they're taking some bold stands in the industry and they're not afraid to just do things like that. But okay, so that was my first follow-up. The next three are really just like customer service stories I've been through this week. I want to share my takeaway and I want to see if you have some other thoughts about it based on like just knowing this industry. So it's about Amazon, Delta, and IRS. So, since I worked at Amazon, I looked into things a bit, but I've always been an Amazon customer for, God knows how long, maybe 20 years now. And I
Mhm.
realized that over the arc of time, like even like especially today, for like the average user, it's actually kind of hard to figure out how to contact Amazon. Like they added a few layers to the menu, so you kind of have to like be persistent. Um, so that's one follow up later for you, which is when you think about this purposely kind of obfuscating how to contact customer support.
Right.
Because like Amazon's known for having great customer support, but they've done this. I don't know when they started this, but I definitely noticed it this week. Um, Actually, we'll cover one at a time since they're like
Sure.
long stories. So what do you think about that one?
I don't like burying the ability to contact customer service teams. Um, and I think that's unfortunate. A lot of people use it as a tactic, certainly to reduce costs. And you'll see it in various forms. A lot of companies will increase friction as a way to make people kind of give up along the way. And I really, really don't like that. A lot of them will frame it as, oh, well, we just want to make sure that if you're going to contact somebody that you really need to, or they say, oh, they'll try to put a million different kind of self-service type questions in front of a person to see if any of those things are the solution. But what that ends up typically doing for a lot of people is just making them more frustrated, right? And if we look at one of the trends in the industry of kind of moving away from sort of the historical KPIs of customer satisfaction and NPS to more something like CES, a customer effort score, people are really interested in CES because it more strongly correlates to better customer outcomes. And that's just very simply, did you make life easier for your customer, or did you make it harder? Right. And I think that putting in unhelpful friction that doesn't actually help you solve your problem is just getting in the way, right? And I don't like the tactic. I think it's a cheap way to reduce costs. It may look good in the short term, and maybe this is a bigger comment on how we measure success, and kind of the short sightedness we get from sort of quarterly business reviews and quarterly earnings reports and et cetera. So maybe there's something to be said about that in a much larger discussion. But as long as that is sort of one of the biggest driving factors behind how customer service executives and leaders are rated on their effectiveness, you will get sort of that short-term view of the customer. It's like, oh well, I'll just make it harder for you to like even talk to me, and I know that that'll reduce my contacts by 30%. And it's like, wow, that really sucks. But sometimes these are the games that are being played in the background at any company.
All right, the second example, which is interesting, is Delta. So I love traveling, and even due to COVID, I couldn't travel a lot, but at least certain airlines like Delta, they let me keep my status, which I love status because it helps me get free upgrades from like pre-COVID.
Mhm.
And so essentially, I have access to the Diamond Medallion line, which is like the highest level of tier for Delta. And I frankly, I love it. I love that I could just call this specific number, and only Delta medallions can call it. And I usually get like a customer service rep in like 2 minutes. And they're like super nice. They always give me like, is there, I actually never thought about this or looked into it. Is there like an equivalent in gaming? Like, do quote unquote gaming whales get better service depending on the company or the game?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's lots of I actually wrote an article about why I wouldn't do this at scale, but I think there is an argument to be made if your company has a specific kind of game, like a lot of these sort of like just straight up gambling games, right, where you're doing poker or something like that, and a lot of your business is based on very obvious VIP, segments of clients. It makes total sense to like cater to them, because at that point it becomes really a luxury product, right? It's a luxury product. It's exclusively, those perks are exclusively for them, and kind of a lot of those benefits trickle down, let's say, to the rest of the gaming population that doesn't pay. And in free-to-play games, you'll see that quite a bit. There's a very small percentage of the population that is essentially funding the game to be free for everybody else to access, right? So if you have any kind of positioning where you're thinking of creating a luxury segment within your game with very exclusive perks, people have done pretty outrageous, like crazy things for the biggest whales of their games that I would never personally do, but I mean, I think that's the kind of clientele they have. That's the kind of game that they have, and it makes total sense for them to make that reinvestment just because these people are paying those ridiculous amounts. There's another version that I think is more fair and makes a little bit more sense in broader terms. And so this was something I did at a startup. I was never able to convince, let's say, a larger company to take this route, but I think it's really interesting. And so what we did was create kind of a value formula for people who are super duper engaged and were connected to other people. Like this person playing makes other people play, right? So these are people who aren't paying you any money, but they're super like engaging. They're very active. They might be clans, they're very active on the forums, etc. And so they play a lot and they get a lot of people to play. They might not buy anything, but they're super duper active and super duper engaged, and they get other people to play your game. And so we would try to have this formula that valued time played, but also valued, people that spent. And so, part of the VIP group were some of them didn't pay any money, but they were extremely engaged, right, and very popular on social, et cetera, and clan leaders or whatnot. And some of them were paying, and so it created this kind of very interesting VIP group. And we broke it down into tiers in which we could talk to different levels of people who were engaged, who didn't pay, maybe blended, and then maybe folks who just spend a ton of money, right? And we could get these kind of interesting different perspectives, and to be able to even prioritize their issues, right? So when they come, just similar to what you shared with Delta, it's like, hey, if you were in the top tier, whatever criteria gets you in the top tier, combination of play and spend, or just pure play engagement, or just pure spend, then those people would get service very quickly, and they would be routed to and a lot of companies, especially in the East, like in China, they have zero problem with this. They totally do this all the time. Like they have literally, you have your own dude sometimes. Like I remember I was speaking to, I used to consult for NetEase back in the day. And one of the GMs talked to me. He's like, oh yeah, I totally am into, high level customer service. He's like, I play this one game and I spend thousands of dollars, and like, they give me this guy's phone number. Like he just has like this dude he calls whenever he needs anything. So it's basically like your own individual, white glove customer support agent whom you have his like work cell phone, I guess. And whenever you have a problem with your game, you just call this dude or this girl and they help you out, right? So there's definitely versions of it. Yeah.
That's awesome. By the way, Jimmy's a producer on our show, and he was actually hosting another tournament, so he's on now, just listening in.
All right, on. Hi, Jimmy.
Okay, two follow-ups there. First is, it's awesome that you actually tried this, because one of our previous guests, Ilya Ratelli, I'm not sure if you met him at Riot, he talked about this concept called supernodes. And we tried to implement it at Amazon, and I don't think we were able to because of the measurement part. But you're exactly spot on, because outside of just pure money spent, the people who are like guild leaders, they put so much effort into things. Like I'm in this WoW guild, or I wasn't for Shadowlands, and I stopped playing after that expansion came out, or we beat the raid, and it's just so much extra work that he had to do on the side, and he doesn't get paid for. Actually, it's crazy. He paid his own money to buy like reagents and like potions for the guild, because people would be selfish. They're like, oh, I don't want to buy, so he would buy food and potions for everyone.
Yeah.
So that was one thought, and then and then the final one is that the final example is IRS, which I'm not sure if you have any comments. It's just totally bad, but I want to share just how crazy this story is, which is, so this has never happened to me before because I just kind of use TurboTax and it kind of works. But apparently in 2018, for my 2018 taxes, they contacted me in 2019, so during COVID, and apparently it was lost in the mail.
Hmm.
So I didn't find out about this until 2020. But in 2020, essentially, since I never replied, the case has been decided against me, and I've been collecting interest and penalty.
Oh, wow.
And now it's like $8,000. So now I'm like, whoa, what the heck happened? So then I call them to figure out what's going on. And I don't know if you ever call the IRS, but first of all, you have to go through 5 prompts to either there's like a menu with 7 options, but only one path gets you to a customer service rep. And I'm talking about, so you have to figure out the right path. I think it was like 3222. So I figured out 3222, but they don't even let you press the buttons. You have to listen to the whole prompt. And after I hit 3222, it's probably like a 4-minute verbal prompt. You don't even get connected. Like it says, oh, we're too busy now.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And then, because it's like $8,000 on the line, I want to like try to resolve it. So I tried multiple times, and in this crazy weird way, I called another number because I was frustrated. I was like, look, I can't get a hold with them. I'll just set an in-person appointment. So I called a hotline to set up an in-person appointment, and they said, no, your problem can only be solved by this number. We'll transfer you. But I'm like, wait, don't transfer me because I just try to get on. It's like, no. Like when we transfer you, you get to the head of the line. And I'm like, oh, okay. So they transferred me, and then I got disconnected.
Yep.
So then I had to call the appointment line again, and the appointment line this time, it said it was too busy for me to call them.
Yep.
So that's what I did yesterday. It was like 7 hours, and at the conclusion, they honestly wore me down. So I finally got to a customer service rep, and their recommendation was, and by the way, and then we figured out that I wasn't even wrong. So what they found, my tax return, it's very technical, but it's something along the lines of, they charged me taxes for like gross income on stock, when they should only charge me for the short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains.
Yeah.
So it seems like a pretty amateur mistake, but now they were like, look, just pay everything up front with the penalties, write us a letter by mail. They're like, because I'm like, okay, cool, I'll fax it to you. Like, no, it's too late because this is already closed. So you have to send this to the reconsiderations department. It seriously sounds like a weird like movie, like bad movie, like Office Space or something. So then I'm like, okay,
Twilight Zone.
I'll just pay first. I'll write you a letter, and they told me it'll take 4 months to reply back, and maybe I'll get a refund back for money that I shouldn't have to have paid
in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, this just sounds like a customer service disaster, and I think IRS can get away with it because it's the government. You don't really have any options, but man, it makes me kind of super appreciate, even sometimes when I have frustrations with a private company.
Yep.
Even when I'm super pissed off about something, I can email someone. I've never written a letter, but I could write a letter. Social media has been great. They're
Social media is great.
Outlets. They're like outlets to do things, but here you can't, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are certain industries that operate in a very similar fashion, right? So, a lot of telecoms are massive. You don't really have that much choice. And so there are some of these industries where you get a few key players and you don't really have a lot of options. You will see a lot of this similar patterns in those companies. It's like, oh, why is customer service so bad for these types of companies? Well, because there's no incentive for them to not be so bad, because you don't actually have a choice. And behind closed doors, a lot of the executives at the very tops of these companies will say things like, you know what, I just want okay service. I don't want fantastic service. Like, just having okay service would be better than a lot of other people, right? And they will build processes, and this really, it makes me angry as well. They'll build processes that ping pong people back and forth in between, let's say two reps, and it doesn't make sense for anybody, and it's super duper frustrating. And And it's really, I think it's really nice that you recognize, some of the challenges on the other end of, for the reps, because for a lot of reps, they're just following the process, and it really makes them angry too, because they feel stupid. They have to deal with negativity all day. They get yelled at, and it's a lot of it is out of that human being's hands. And so a lot of times what I do when I get in those situations, like I had to call a telecom once, and so I called this company, and the first rep I get, I say, "Hey, look, I know you probably have no authority to do what I'm about to ask, but you've made the mistake. I know you probably have these KPIs to watch after. So I need you to contact your manager. Don't waste our time here. Just contact your manager and tell them, like, this is what we need, right? What we need to get done." And she was totally cool about it. She escalates me to her manager. Manager tries to stonewall me, and I'm like, "Look, dude, like, I know you probably get negative marks against you. If you give me a refund, da 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 da." Like, you have a very simple choice. Either I can, report these charges as fraudulent and charge back, and then your company has to pay for everything plus another fee, or you can refund me the half that you double charge me for, and you can maintain a customer, right? You have a very simple business choice to make here. And then he's like, okay, let me. He treated me like a thief, which I did not take kindly to, and I let him have it. I was like, do you know who you're talking to? You're talking to a customer, not a thief. I don't care what your KPIs are, right? And then so after a lot of hollering, he transferred me to their loyalty team. And even though they took 30 minutes to investigate all of my claims, they ended up giving me the refund, right? A lot of times, for these kinds of places, you just have to show a little bit of empathy. Like, look, I know what the hell you're going through, but like, this is not the way to resolve it. And, you need to get me somebody who can actually help me. But it doesn't help when they can't even pick up the phone, right? So,
Yeah,
the government's like the worst for bureaucracy and like
right.
ridiculous process.
I think this brought two thoughts to me. Number one, I think that I was essentially successful in my final call, the final call that actually went through with the IRS, because I I wasn't pissed off, and I wasn't trying to do what you were saying. I was just trying to be calm, and I think
Okay.
that helped the situation. Now that I know what you just said, I'm going to take that strategy 100% of the time, because because you're right. They're not the ones who designed the process. They're just trying to go through like a playbook or something.
Yep,
Um,
most of them are.
exactly. And what was my follow up thought? Um, oh, my follow up thought was, I never did this before, but and you can't do this for like sensitive things like your, like IRS using your social security number. But I think in certain cases, it might make more economical sense to hire like an assistant overseas who works for you by the hour, and maybe like one day, like an 8 hour day, they take care of all of this for you. That might be interesting. I've never tried it before.
Yeah, to take all of your like a personal assistant.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Maybe this doesn't apply to gaming customer service, but just in general customer service, do they allow like assistants to handle like a customer's business?
Um, I think there are some cases where it depends exactly what kind of business, but you can certainly hire different sorts of business functions. Let's say if you're managing, a couple of small businesses yourself, and you need help with an accountant, and if you get all of the paperwork done, to where the different parties know that this person is authorized, as an employee of you or whatever it is, that yeah, that certainly can work out. Having outsourced professional services like that, there's lots of people that do that, and it can certainly work out. Now you have to be careful, about vetting like who these people are, and if you can work with a competent outsourcer who's cool with like just I don't know if there's any. It's a good question. Like we do this at scale, and I've worked for companies that do this at scale, but for an individual kind of concierge service, I'm sure there's something. I'm sure there's something. It might be a little bit more expensive, but I'm sure there's something.
Okay, my final series of questions are around entry-level customer service roles. I asked this because it's kind of a weird analogy, but I'm going to just say it anyways. I feel like in gaming, CS or QA roles were like the path to like the American dream.
Right.
So many people start off in CS or QA, and then they end up into like production, and they become like game directors. Like it's really like a very common story. But I think that was more the case maybe in like the 2000s when like the scale wasn't just that big. Now I only hear it because back then a lot of the CS orgs were just like in the United States, right?
Hmm.
Now with a lot of the CS orgs being overseas, let's just take like North America or like US employees as an example. Is there even like a path for or is entry level CS and QA even a path for like let's say US students who just graduate from college, or is it something else? Is it just like marketing? Like is it, like that's the new entry ground for people to get into for gaming?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a valid way to get your foot in the door, but I tell a lot of people, because the industry has come so far in a short amount of time, your best bet is to get your foot in the door exactly within the department you want to be, right? Like there's less and less people going from QA or CS, indirectly into game design. And there's a lot more competition. So, just percentage wise, you're going to see a lot of people go in less. But I mean, there's so many people where, you know, a long time ago, there weren't as many people who had experience working with game design tools or doing any coding, etc. But now you're getting kids, they're coming straight out of university. They know how to code. They're technical. Maybe they built a demo, right? And so I'm telling young people, look, if you want to be in game design, for example, best you go actually build something. It's way more compelling for me as an interviewer to see people who have some kind of portfolio to show versus like, hey, I got a really like they might be really cool, and they're fun and everything like that, and they're great to the players. But I mean, if you're just telling me like I haven't built anything, but I'm really good at CS, and I'll be like, can you stay in CS and like help build that organization, right? Because you're starting to see CS organizations get more mature as well, and people build a career path, within the CS org and stay there for like decade, right, or more. And so there's a lot to be done there as well, and even in terms of like tools engineering and stuff like that for more mature CS teams. And I mean, even QA was much more of an in round, especially to game design. You still hear stories like that, but I mean, I had a cousin who was in QA for a long time, and he was relentless. He tried time and time again to get a game designer role, but he never did. He was a QA lead, been there for over a decade, made a lot of great suggestions to folks in the Hearthstone team, and did well there. And they even listened to some of the things that he said, and implemented some of his designs. Um, he actually passed away last not too long ago, my cousin, but he did a great job, and it just wasn't in the cards for him to kind of ever make that transition into game design. And I think it's a much better route for people to go and actually build something, um, whether that be a demo for a game or just a game themselves. It doesn't even have to be like a PC game or anything like that. You could literally build like a board game or something, because a lot of the design elements are going to be very similar. So having something to show and talk about and having actually built something is, I think, much more valuable.
That's such a good idea about board game because I personally like challenge myself to do like one thing outside of work every year. So 20, I think it was like 20, yeah, last year it was like a documentary about my esports team from like 5 years ago. But I
Mhm.
had all this footage and I found a production company. I learned like a lot of basic things to do that. This year it was this podcast. Next year I was thinking about what to do, maybe like a book, which has always been a dream, but super hard. But the board game sounds like a really good, interesting thing too, because I'm not a game designer and I feel like I think you're spot on around game design systems can be applied to all sorts of games,
Yep.
and board games seem pretty adjacent. Maybe making a card game seems harder, but I don't know why board game seems like it's more manageable. Okay. Final question for you is going back to the craft, scaling CS orgs. How do you know if you are a master at this craft? Like, what are the levers and KPIs you get to pull with? Like, I think you mentioned earlier, like contacts. I'm assuming you have like, like a limited budget. What do you have to play with, and what are you trying to min max?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of what you're going to be able to do is constrained by budget for sure. And so, if you have a place that has money to burn, consider yourself very, very fortunate. You're probably not going to be in that situation too often. But if you have senior leadership who understand what the investments are innately, um, then it's really a blessing for you to be able to take that and then build out the organization appropriately with all of the data and building the connections of all that data back to kind of supplying what is the business value being delivered through all of these services. A lot of people never even get the resources to be able to figure that out, but I would say at the very top, you're always looking at cost of your operations. And there's a bunch of different ways to look at this, but unfortunately, a lot of people get caught up in kind of like the cost per interaction or the cost per ticket. I wouldn't say that's the best way to look at it, especially in the game space where you have free to play. I would much more be looking at things like kind of the cost per MAU, because you're supporting your entire player base, right? And there's value to, as we spoke about earlier, players who don't necessarily monetize. I always used to say at Epic, like you need 99 other players to have Battle Royale, right? So it's really important to understand that there's great value, especially in these multiplayer games where part of the stickiness is having other human beings to play with and have that mix of fun. And so it becomes painfully obvious in some of these mobile games that you're just playing against bots. So there's that kind of whole issue. So looking at kind of cost per MAU to support, you will be looking at the cost across your languages. So what does it cost to support, divided by like the different markets that you're aiming at. And that kind of varies in terms of how a company splits that up. Do they do it by actual kind of geolocation? They do it by language? However the company, the business thinks of it, I think player support folks would do well to make sure that they're structuring the way they look at those cost KPIs in the same way, so that you can easily assign a cost to a region. So it makes sense. But so people doing in finance don't have to search around and be like, okay, how does this actually apply to the way that we understand the business cost of the business. So getting that structure out, I think, is really important. Then I would say like really focusing on a lot of companies eventually come up, even ones that aren't as well funded, come up with some kind of churn algorithm, right? What is the likelihood that some player will churn? And then once your data wizards do that for you, I think it's really important. As soon as you have that, the player support organization needs to grab that and understand how it increases or decreases when they start interacting with your CS org, right? Because that's where the business value is. A lot of people never, ever get around to that. They're just looking at these like enterprise call center metrics, And that's really besides the point, because you don't know what any of that does and what players are actually doing in your game. You're just kind of just going off like all of this lore, right? That's kind of built up in the customer service industry more broadly and within the game's sort of player support space itself. And it's like, no, 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 no. Like you're always seeking to like invalidate the lore, right? Like that. I don't buy like all of these kinds of, well, just because it increases player spend, and I say prove it, right? Like prove it. If you're gonna make a claim that big, you have to prove it. And I think one of the key ways in which you look at that, like realistically, is looking at how does it affect that churn percentage. We know that churn, likelihood to churn is always going to go up over time, but as they contact your support teams, that's a critical moment. And for which very specific ticket types do those matter most, right? Because then you're going to be able to separate the noise from the signal. There's a lot of stuff out there that's just noise. It's just people trolling your support team. It's like people taking a piss on it, whatever, right? They're just doing all of this stuff just to like, have some fun, or just to poke at you, or maybe they're just angry and they're venting, right? And that's cool too. But then there's other super important, like business critical stuff where I've always phrased it. My teams have heard me say this a million times. You can't pay, you can't play. Like those issues are bottom line, obviously very important. So if I can't access your game, not only am I super angry, like I can't engage, and if I can't engage with your product, the chances I'm going to do anything helpful to your business is like zero. And if I'm having trouble, obviously with something in the billing front, it's like I don't know how many times I've been so embarrassed. I'm helping players because I sell insert tickets myself, and they're like, I'm trying to give you money and you like won't accept it. And I'm like, gosh, I'm so embarrassed. This is like one of the crappiest things to like be involved in. I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, what's going on? Let me find out what's going on. Right. And so, you know, um, prioritizing those two is obvious. And then there's going to be a couple of other ones that are, somewhat related, where you're going to find real value in focusing your support efforts there, whether that's technology or people, or just better processes, or better upstream. Like again, going back to that old school Amazon philosophy, is like just don't have a problem in the first place, right? How can you get to the source so that your customers don't even have the problem in the first place? And I still think that is should be the ultimate goal for a lot of people, because it's like, look, people don't want to talk to your support teams. They don't have to. And I think that if you respect your customers, you're going to try to do that as much as possible, to deliver an experience that is like kind of bug free. So looking at finding out those, a lot of people kind of pin stuff to CSAT, kind of traditionally, right? Customer satisfaction, NPS. Both of those are like they're they're very limited in their helpfulness, but especially early on, they can flag things for you so you know where to look and where to drill down. The problem is that a lot of people don't want to drill down. They just want to say, "Oh, look, I have a high, metric here." And it's like, "So what? What does that actually mean?" And then they don't even look at like the individual categories to find out how valuable any of that stuff is. Productivity is another one, absolutely huge. However you measure that, a lot of people, when they first start, they make a mistake. So try to avoid this one. They always look at like, oh, number of tickets or issues resolved, right? And it's like, yeah, you're going to incentivize a lot of really garbage behavior if you do that. It's much better to look at a general productivity metric. So if you're doing things like emails, it's like how many outbound emails do you have, in general per hour for your best and most productive and most effective agents. And then you can use those natural benchmarks to kind of push your organization up and understand what high performance is. But typically we'll talk about either, some people say emails per hour, outbound emails per hour, touches per hour is another one. If you have chat, how many, you should probably have a limit on, in general, kind of like how long those live chats should be. Usually with teams that I'm working with, in general, we try to aim for a 15-minute chat. But if it's a more complex issue, like don't just abandon your players, just stay on as long as you need to. Just, most issues can be solved fairly quickly. So those are the top line metrics. So you're looking at overall effectiveness, right? I think customer effort scores gaining traction in gaming. It's definitely very, very popular in retail and big tech, but I think gaming's a little bit behind there. So adopting CES, I think, would be really healthy over NPS and over CSAT. Um, yeah, your budget, productivity, and those are pretty much like the big KPIs you want to be looking at in order to measure, your success and understand how your players are actually doing, and of course that effect on the hopefully a positive effect on reducing the churn likelihood percentage.
Okay, I know I said final question for the third time, or maybe twice already, but truly
All
for the
good.
third time, because you mentioned the word lore, which triggers something in my mind, which is, gaming, just companies always have different wording for common things. So I want to understand, is there any significance to player support versus customer service? Because, there's like marketing versus publishing. And
Mhm.
even something like esports, some people call it, okay, well, this is competitive gaming, and then the highest level is called like esports. So any significance behind the phrase or any lore behind player support?
From what I've heard, and it's funny because when I first got started in this space, my CEO called it customer support, and I didn't have a problem with that. I think why it's called player support, the philosophical reason that my teams had for kind of going along with the nomenclature was that the player context was different enough from a typical customer context that we wanted to call that out, not only in terms of, like, let's say, very broadly gamer culture, and understanding that set of problems, but also in terms of the actual business. Because for free to play, a lot of the people contacting you are not customers. They haven't paid you anything. You haven't monetized them. And so it sets forth a little bit of a different way of dealing with things. There's also the other really big kind of hornet's nest around a lot of games companies have had to outsource, customer service functions, player support functions. And typically at a lot of these very large BPOs, you'll find a very rigid best practices, corporate feel to customer service that a lot of the games companies struggle to like beat out of like the teams that they hire. And that's always a huge cultural battle because you have, a very old industry that likes to do things a certain way, right? And kind of along the lines of a lot of these rigid processes that we all hate. And it's like, oh, why is customer so bad? Like in most companies that we have to call, like everyone dreads calling customer service, right? Well, it's because like the industry was built for something very different, like a long time ago. And what a lot of us want today are much more human interactions, and we want empowered customer service agents who don't have to transfer us to somebody else. You just say, I can take care of that for you. Yeah, I'll refund you right now. No problem. Take care of it. Is there anything else I can help you with? Right? Like you'd much rather have that 2-minute conversation with an intelligent, empowered person than you would being transferred 3 tiers up 48 minutes later, right? And then finally, after yelling your guts out for the third time, the person doing the right thing, it's like, oh, I could just do the right thing, 46 minutes ago, which would totally be in their power, right? And so you have, again, I think that sort of dichotomy. So you want to, psychologically, you want to use different language when you want a different thing, right? Like if I called it the same thing, a lot of people, especially if I'm doing any outsourcing, might mistake it for like, oh, you want, the vanilla flavor we always have. It's like, no, I actually want, rainbow unicorn with like crazy ass sprinkles and pop rocks. Like I don't want that. But you're calling it the same thing. And so there can be some confusion there. I think those are the most valid things. And some parts of me think it's just like not really that necessary if you, as a contrarian, like you should really just build it into the culture of your team and like the way your processes are, right? And that'll make the difference. You don't necessarily have to call your team's player support if you don't want to. I don't think it's necessary.
Well, thanks, Tony. I did not expect you to have such an actual thorough answer, but I'm glad I asked. And I mean, this has been an action-packed hour plus on gaming, player support, customer support, whatever you want to call it. And it's been great because I feel like it's like a master class slash soup to nuts explanation where I essentially I potentially could go interview for like a role now and just use your answers, at least remotely, unless I memorize them. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with our audience.
It was a pleasure, John. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope some of it was helpful.